Hey everyone, so y'all read the title. I'm going to be sorting K-pop idols into their Hogwarts houses. I plan on eventually turning this into a series, but today I'm going to be starting with my ults, Infinite, Day6, and Got7. Before I jump into the sorting, there are a couple important things that I need to note really quickly. This is completely subjective. Our opinions might totally differ on this, and that's totally cool. Personally, I'm taking into account the way the idol acts and presents themselves, the house's traits, and when applicable, the idol's Myers-Briggs type. If you're not familiar with Myers-Briggs, I'll leave a couple links down in the description to the quiz and to an explanation of it. Of the groups we're talking about today, only Got7 and Day6 have actually taken the test, so I'm gonna be mostly using it for them rather than for Infinite. And then for my own bias, I am a Slitherclaw. I'm a Slytherin Ravenclaw hat stall. I've gotten it many times on Pottermore, so yes, I am genuinely a hat stall, but I do typically claim Ravenclaw as my house. Alright, time to jump into the groups, and we're going to start with Infinite. So I'm going to start with Seungyu, who I think was one of the easier ones to sort for me, because although I considered Gryffindor and Ravenclaw due to his boldness and his intelligence, Slytherin seemed to be the best fit for him, because in a way it combines traits from both Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. Because Slytherin has a bit of Gryffindor's boldness in the frame of leadership and mixes in a bit of the wit you'd get with Ravenclaw. Really, of everyone we're going to be talking about today, I think Seungyu is the one who most embodies the Slytherin house, not because he's evil, because Slytherins aren't inherently evil, but because he has that bold leadership combined with a cunningness and a wit that is really, really inherent in Slytherin. Moving on to our next member, which is Dongwoo. Believe it or not, I was actually fairly convinced going into this that I was gonna put him in Ravenclaw. I know, that's kind of surprising, but I have reasons. Ravenclaw is generally where the most eccentric individuals end up. I mean, if you think about it, the closest correlation to Dongwoo within Harry Potter is probably Luna Lovegood. But in the end, Dongwoo, as I'm sure you all expected, is a true Hufflepuff. Kind, caring, and soft-hearted, our angel Dongwoo is trusting to a fault, and I think this is clearly the most fitting house for him, although his eccentric nature did lead me toward Ravenclaw for a little while, because the man is actually very smart, even though he doesn't always come off as very smart. He's incredibly intelligent. But I do think that the traits that are most important to him and that are most exemplified by him are his kind, caring, soft-hearted nature, so Hufflepuff. So moving on to Woohyun, who I think was one of the harder ones for me at first. When thinking about Hogwarts houses, there are often some unofficial traits that seem to get associated with houses. For example, because Gryffindors are so brave and courageous, I often tend to also associate them with being charming, even though that isn't necessarily one of the official Gryffindor traits. And because of that, I've decided to put Woohyun into Gryffindor, because what would he be if not charming? He's quick to make a fool of himself and act silly and be loud, and I think that boldness and confidence is another reason that he fits pretty well into Gryffindor. He may not be the most stereotypically brave, bold person on the planet, but he is really willing to be very outgoing and out there and make a fool of himself, and I think that's something that Gryffindors are also pretty willing to do. So Gryffindor. Seungyu was another really tricky one for me because in a way I feel like I could make an argument for almost any house except Hufflepuff. He's bold and outgoing like you'd expect from a Gryffindor, but he's also cunning, resourceful, and occasionally a little manipulative like you'd expect from a Slytherin. And he's also quick-witted, a bit eccentric, and very intelligent like you'd expect from a Ravenclaw. In the end, I think I'm actually going to go ahead and put him in Ravenclaw because although he's rather extroverted for the house, Ravenclaw does really welcome people who are unafraid to paint outside the lines, and when adding that to his quick wit, I think Ravenclaw is really the best fit for him. And although it's not the most evident, apparent thing about him, I think that if you were to ask him what he most values in himself, he would probably cite his wit or his intelligence, so I think Ravenclaw's a pretty good fit. Moving on to Myungsu, who to me just screams Ravenpuff hat stall. He has a lot of traits that are very Ravenclaw. He's very intelligent and has a lot of the traits that I consider unofficial Ravenclaw traits. He's geeky, he's a homebody, he enjoys manga, he's a cat person. These are all things that aren't Ravenclaw traits per se, but they do paint a picture of a person who would generally belong in Ravenclaw. like an introverted person who just wants to be home reading. Even though he's generally very quiet and his L persona is known for being cold, Myung-soo is actually a rather warm person, which I generally heavily associate with Hufflepuff. In the end, I think it's a bit of a toss-up and I'm not sure which he would choose, but upon adding in his love of photography, which is very creative, I think I'm going to go ahead and put him into Ravenclaw. Sungjong is another interesting one because although they're generally seen as the most opposite of the houses, I think he's actually somewhere between a Slytherin and a Hufflepuff. On the one hand, he's known for being the evil maknae. He can be a bit savage and cunning, especially on solo challenges, which speaks to the self-preservation aspect of Slytherin, but he's also very hardworking and diligent. For example, when Infinite was gone for such a long time and a lot of the other members had different jobs and acting roles, Sungjong became like a trainee again, spending a lot of his time practicing, showing that he's humble and hardworking. Because of this, I lean toward Hufflepuff for him, and that's where I'm going to put him, but I think Slytherin also wouldn't be a bad fit for him either. So now we're going to go ahead and move on to Day 6, which I think across the board was the most difficult group to place. So we're going to start with our leader Sungjin, who was also the hardest one for me to sort, because despite feeling like I understand Sungjin very well, none of the traits I heavily associate with him are ones that correlate to a house. Unless, of course, crackhead is suddenly a house trait, but I'm pretty sure it's not. In the end, I'm tentatively placing him in Gryffindor. Sungjin is an extrovert, which leads me to lean in literally any direction but Ravenclaw, and he's also the leader of Day 6, which pushes me in the direction of Slytherin and Gryffindor. When you add in the fact that he's willing to be weird and silly literally whenever, that pushes me more in the direction of Gryffindor specifically. Plus, if any house is going to be bold enough to completely shave their head, it's probably Gryffindor. So although I'm not super confident in this placement, and I would probably hear pretty much any argument for any house on Sungjin, I do think that this is logically the one that fits the best, and also I think that his personality, which is ENFJ, fits the best into this house. So now moving on to Jay, who made it kind of easier for me, but also kind of harder, by saying at a fan sign that he's a Hufflepuff. I am taking idols' own claims about their house into account, but also talking about my own opinion, but I think that for Jay, it's a bit of a special case because he's proven that he does have a pretty good knowledge of Harry Potter, and honestly, literally no one would deem themselves a Hufflepuff if they didn't know what they were talking about, so I do trust Jay when he says that he's a Hufflepuff. That said, Jay's personality type is INTP, which is also my personality type, and we are the most stereotypical Ravenclaws that you will ever get. And to be honest, I feel like I could kind of make a pretty convincing argument for Jay to belong in any of the 4 houses. That said, I am going to end up placing him exactly where he thinks he is, in Hufflepuff. I have a whole video about how multifaceted Jay is, but I think that you can see Hufflepuff tendencies in all of those facets. When he's being a meme, he's being silly for the sake of making other people laugh. Even though he roasts his friends all the time, best believe he would take a bullet for Jimin or Wonpil literally any day. And on top of his Day 6 responsibilities, he also hosted ASC for 2 years and has J6, which proves how hardworking he is. Like, honestly, I don't think I'd want to do anything on top of normal idol responsibilities, and for a while he was doing so much. Overall, I think everything combined, he fits pretty well into Hufflepuff. Moving on to Brian, my initial thought, as is generally the case, was just throw him directly into Ravenclaw because that's my immediate instinct for anyone I see as both highly creative and highly intelligent. However, Ravenclaw is also the most introverted house, and despite Brian being very smart and creative, I'm not sure that those are the traits that are most important to him, because another one of his major personality traits is that he's very high energy, very energetic, which I would say to be the antithesis of Ravenclaw. Despite the fact that I see it as the complete opposite of Ravenclaw, I actually have a very strong urge to place him in Gryffindor due to his bold nature. This is also backed up by his Myers-Briggs type ENTP, which is almost exclusively associated with either Ravenclaw or Gryffindor by most people. I'm pretty torn, so I think that he could easily fit into either, but I think if given the chance, he would choose Gryffindor, so I'm gonna put him there. Moving on to our boy Wonpil, who I think is easily either a Ravenclaw or a Hufflepuff. I really can't see him fitting into Gryffindor or Slytherin, despite the fact that I looked up other people's opinion on this just to get kind of an idea of what other people were saying, And a lot of people were putting him in Slytherin. I don't know, guys. That doesn't make any sense to me. Anyway, overall, I think he fits easiest into Hufflepuff, given how caring he is. Also, he's an introvert, but not cold in any way. He's a really warm introvert. He's friendly and silly and often very weird, and I think that his soft-hearted nature combined with his warm introversion is a really good fit for Hufflepuff. And finally, moving on to our boy Drum. Doan is the only member where I only considered one house. The boy's a Hufflepuff. This might sound kind of random, but I think that his Instagram posts are actually what solidify this for me, because anytime he posts on Day6 Kilogram, it's always either him practicing or a picture of a cute animal. These are the things that are important to him that he wants to share, and they both lean Hufflepuff. He wants to show his hard work and dedication to his instrument as well as his progress on it, and his love of animals. Overall, I think he's probably the easiest Day6 member to sort, but that's not saying too much because the others were pretty difficult. Finally, moving on to Got7, who were all across the board in terms of how easy it was to sort them. A couple of them I didn't even consider any other houses except one, and a couple of them I was just completely torn, and I eventually decided that they were hat stalls. Starting out with one of those hat stalls, JB. I found myself incredibly torn between Slytherin and Ravenclaw for him. I think I'm going to veer into Ravenclaw for JB, because apart from intelligence and wit, Ravenclaw is also the house for people who value creativity and originality. Often I think Ravenclaws are either very geeky or very hipstery, and when you look at JB's Instagram alone, he really tries to cultivate a specific aesthetic with his feed. He also really loves reading, and when he reads, he often reads either complex books or self-help books, and I think that's also a very Ravenclaw thing to do. So while I'm torn between the two houses, and I think the Sorting Hat would be too, I think he would definitely choose Ravenclaw over Slytherin, so that's where I'm putting him. Moving on to Mark, which could cause a bit of an uproar, quite literally, because this might sound a little odd to some people, but my immediate instinct was to put him directly into Gryffindor, which I generally see as the most extroverted house, which is the complete opposite of Mark. But I tend to think of Gryffindors as the jocks of Hogwarts, and I think that's kind of where Mark fits. He enjoys sports and martial arts tricking, and he can also have a bit of a temper, all things that I kind of associate with Gryffindor. That said, as we all know, Mark is very, very introverted, which lends itself quite well to Ravenclaw. Mark has proven to be very quick-witted with wordplay, and often is the most skilled member when dealing with mental challenges and puzzles such as escape rooms. That said, however, Hermione was also a Gryffindor, despite having a lot of Ravenclaw tendencies and not being the most extroverted person. So in the end, I am going to go ahead and put Mark into Gryffindor. A very introverted Gryffindor, but I think that he's a Gryffindor, although I wouldn't have too many qualms with anyone calling him a Ravenclaw. Moving on to Jackson. The Sorting Hat barely grazed the tips of Jackson's hair before screaming Gryffindor. I mean, is there really any questioning that he's the epitome of a Gryffindor? He's outgoing and bold, and the only times we really see him get upset is when he feels like someone has been treated unjustly. Gryffindors can also be seen as very headstrong and stubborn, and if that isn't Jackson, I don't know what is. Honestly, I don't have a ton to say here because I feel like it's pretty obvious. I mean, I could potentially see someone making some sort of argument for Hufflepuff because that's the only other one I could see him fitting into, but I mean, come on, he's a Gryffindor. Okay, moving on to Jin Young, who, as he is wont to do, gave me the most trouble. Given that he's my ult K-pop bias, I feel like I've seen basically every side to his personality and therefore could really make a case for any house if I tried hard enough. However, like our other JJ Project member before him, I see Jin Young as a Ravenclaw Slytherin hat stall. Unlike JB though, I'm much more torn with Jin Young because his savageness would suggest Slytherin, but he's also often joking when he's being savage. In the end, I am going to place him in Ravenclaw, largely because he's very openly dorky, which I see as pretty opposite of Slytherin. But really, I see this as the thinnest of margins and could easily see him going into Slytherin. Moving on to Young Jae, who, like a lot of his other members, I'm torn on. Obviously, as our sunshine, mine and probably most people's immediate instinct is to put him into Hufflepuff, but I actually found myself kind of torn between Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff for him. Because obviously a lot of the time we see that bright, happy, smiley side to his personality, but obviously he's a fully complex human, so there's a lot more to him than just that. And apart from just being Got7's sunshine, he's also really, really creative. He's one of the members who has a SoundCloud and posts his own original solo songs. And although all of the members of Got7 have written music for the group, he's one of the ones that's written the most. Obviously, all of them are musicians because they're a music group, but he seems to be one of the ones that most deeply entrenches himself in the music, and that's very Ravenclaw because Ravenclaws are very creative. Although it was really easy for me to narrow it down to these two houses for him, I think this is the one where I'm having the hardest time choosing between the two because I think that there are really, really good arguments for each of them. In the end, I think I'm going to put him in Hufflepuff just because I think his most prominent and identifiable traits are the ones that are found more readily in Hufflepuff, but I think he could just as easily fit into Ravenclaw. I think he's really a true hat stall. As we've seen many times in this group, Bam Bam is another interesting one. In preparing to sort them, I was interested to see how other people had sorted them, so I read through a few posts of people sorting the members of all of these groups, and I was kind of surprised to see that almost everyone put Bam Bam into Slytherin. In a way, I can kind of understand it because I think he's put there mostly because of the way he styles himself and the fact that he can kind of be a bit of a little shit. And plus we also use a snake emoji to represent him most of the time. But I think those are more stereotypes of Slytherin rather than actual traits of the house. I think he's really more of a Hufflepuff. He's very outgoing, and Hufflepuff is one of the more social houses. There was a moment where I was tempted to put him in Gryffindor, but then I remembered all the times when he was scared and just ran or screamed, and it just didn't seem right. To be honest, I'm not really sure any of the houses is that great of a fit for Bam Bam, but Helga Hufflepuff designed her house to be the most accepting, to accept people regardless of any other factors, and to accept those who didn't fit into the other houses. And since I'm already leaning toward Hufflepuff for Bam Bam, I think this is where we're going to put him because he doesn't really fit into any of the other houses, and therefore I think that this is the best fit for him. And this doesn't have anything to do with the house itself, but I see a lot of correlation between him and Day6's Jay, who were both known as very loud and memey and silly, but who both, I think, fit into Hufflepuff for one reason or another, so I think that just solidifies my reasoning for putting him in Hufflepuff. And finally, the last member of Got7, and also the last member that we're going to be sorting today, Yugyeom was one of the easiest ones. Like his best friend Bam Bam before him, Yugyeom is a Hufflepuff. Got7 themselves named Yugyeom as the most positive member, and that to me is just the clearest sign screaming Hufflepuff. I also thought back to some of the moments where he got really whiny when he thought something was unfair, and fairness is something that Hufflepuffs really value. Despite him sometimes being the evil Magne, I feel like much more often he's just this sweet, kind human who's very hardworking and very caring, and those are all things that are heavily associated with Hufflepuff. Honestly, Yugyeom is one of the people where I didn't even really consider another house because I think that he just fits really perfectly in here. So that is it for this first edition of Sorting K-pop Idols. Let me know if you enjoyed this and if you would like to see more of these. I think past this point, the next groups I would do are BAP, Pentagon, and maybe 17 or BTS. Not totally sure. Also, let me know down in the comments what your Hogwarts house is, and if you don't know, definitely go take a sorting hat quiz because that's lots of fun. And also let me know where you might sort some of these idols. Don't feel the need to list all of them because I'm pretty sure we just went through like 18 idols, so don't feel the need to sort all of them, but if you have any strong opinions on where idols belong, let me know. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!